you're gonna get it.
Okay, there we go.
There we go. Yep. It's not flashing anymore.
There we go.
Very cool. Well, we're just gonna get right into it. Well, welcome back to Razor Trident. This is the Sunday piece of content that I'm going to be dropping, and we're finally talking ball because there's actually stuff to talk about finally in this off season. So don't have to just do these game shows anymore. I have broken the chains of the game show content at this point in the Mariners off season, at least for now. If they could wait until a month to make another move, and I may have to revert back to that, but we're gonna hope not. Today we have Ben Ranieri of the Sea Level Substack back on the channel. Yeah, how's it going, Ben?
Good, man. It was nice to have something like tangible to talk about
Mm-hmm.
for once, as I'm sure that you feel. And thank God that I don't have to do a game show for a little while and get absolutely wrecked again.
Yeah,
Uh,
that
because that wasn't
bankrupt.
good. That
Yeah,
wasn't good for me. So hopefully just talking ball goes a little bit better for me.
yeah. Today we will not be mentioning Spacey the Needle. He will not be coming up. There are no bankrupts today when you have quite literally an amount of money to get back in the game. If you don't know what we're talking about, go back and watch the Wheel of Fortune. It's only a couple videos back and on my channel. That was a fun time. Also with Colby Patnode of Locked On and Colton of Mariner Mojo. But yeah, I guess needless to say, spoilers did not go great for Ben as one of the contestants on that. But hey, I mean, we'll get back to it next off season. We'll run it back. Maybe the tides will change. Who knows? So yeah, no more game shows. I'm sure we're both very happy about
At
that,
least for a little while.
at
Yeah.
least for a little bit. So yeah, today we're gonna talk ball. We signed earlier this week Donovan Solano. He was the first 26-man roster signing that we've made. Obviously, we made several 40-mans prior, but now we actually have a guy who we are going to be watching on our television screens for sure in 2025, and Donovan Solano. Kind of I don't know if I would say a controversial move. I would say more people don't really understand why Donovan Solano. So I guess that's why we're going to talk about him and how he fits into this club. So yeah, what's your take as far as signing Donovan Solano and where are you at with that?
Um, so like I don't know, the way that I kind of talk about this with anybody is like when my friends or whatever that don't follow this as closely, I guess, as I do, but are still Mariners fans and stuff like that. And um, there's usually with moves like this, there's a lot of like, man, this is pretty mediocre and stuff like that. What I will say is I talked about this with Jordan Schusterman the other day on my show, and I felt like the way that we kind of talked about it and the way that we kind of let off our conversation was that once you start doing this and once you start like really understanding like where we're at and what is realistic for an off season, um, then you get into like, okay, what could they actually do? And what things would we realistically actually like them to do within the constraints? Because, I could go on my show every day or go on Twitter every day and complain about, I wish that they had more money. And that's just a given for all of us. Like, we wish that there was more there. We wish there was more resources put into things. But when you really look at it and you break things down, we have to try to figure out what are they going to do and why are they doing it this way. And obviously, a big part of that is that we know that they don't have a ton of money to spend, right? At least as of right now. And it would appear to remain that way, and unless they make a Luis Castillo deal. Um, but for me, like the big thing that it seems like people have wanted for a while is for them to get like you should want to get good hitters. Like they need to get good hitters and guys that just like put the ball in play and are just like productive hitters. And that's kind of what they did here. Um, obviously, it's hard to take one move. It's hard for me to take this move Because in a vacuum, I like this move. I like Donovan Solano. I've liked him for a while, but it's also hard to know how much I really like this move until I have the full picture, right? Because like if this is your A1 acquisition of the offseason, then it's clearly not good enough. But if this is your even your maybe your second bat and you get a good arm, a bullpen arm and a better hitter or just a better everyday player, then yeah, like I think this helps a lot. So I just there's still so much that can be determined about what his role actually is, because he does have some versatility in the infield. Um, he could play first base, he could play at old second base, he could play kind of all over the place, which is kind of what I anticipate. Um, but like just in a vacuum and just like generally, I've liked the player for a while. I actually thought they should have signed him last offseason. Somebody that Ty and I specifically have been big fans of for a while because he just hits. I have a buddy that's a Giants fan, and I remember a couple of years ago, he was actually my roommate at the time. Um, and he's Donnie Barrels, man. Like he finds the barrel, he puts it in play, and he hits line drives. So he's a good hitter. It's more so just like where does he fit, and what does that look like at the end of the day when we're rolling into spring training or whenever the roster is kind of final per se. Um, that's sort of how when I can really look at this and be like, what does this move actually mean? But just on the surface level, I like the player, I like the fit, um, and at the end of the day, like if it doesn't work out, it was $3.5 million, so it's not catastrophic by any means.
Yeah, and it feels kind of similar to I remember last trade deadline. I was really pounding the table like we need to get that guy to get the ball in play. We need one of those guys because that was just something we couldn't do. It felt like especially with runners in scoring position, we just could not get the ball in play and I understand the ground balls and can be outs most of the time, but for me my philosophy is I'd rather have a ground ball than a strikeout because a ground ball, at least there is a chance something can happen from that, and you're giving there to be an opportunity that baseball is baseball, and people make errors or wacky things happen, and just getting that guy, and then we got Justin Turner, and look what he did. He hit pretty well, and he was the guy just get the ball in play when it needed to be in play. And Donovan Solano, from what we can tell, is like gonna be that guy. And he's not gonna hit home runs necessarily, like and he's not gonna be um, slugging the ball out of the park at all. But we do need that guy to just get the ball in play when it's needed. And you know, I just don't see any problem with that. Now, I understand from a fan's perspective when they've been waiting all off season 2+ months, and then your first actual acquisition is just Donovan Solano. I understand the being like you're waiting for like Pete Alonso to the Mariners passing bomb or something. You want that. You don't want Donovan Solano on a $3.5 million deal. But I think it's interesting, kind of the way people talk about sports on social media and specifically the Mariners, because like you said earlier, you and I will say for every content creator that makes stuff about the Mariners, we are all very much aware of the payroll problem and very much want it to not be a problem. We all would love for them to go out and be able to get whoever they want or get those big names. And us talking about Donovan Solano in a positive way is not being like, oh, this is sufficient. It's just you need to be realistic and we need to talk about what he can add to the club, and he does add some stuff. Now I'm curious, I feel like if I were to bet, maybe he might be that platoon with Luke Rayleigh at first base. I know he would fit that, especially with the lefty righty splits for both of them. It makes sense. um so but obviously with us not having more moves and not knowing who they're going to end up getting, maybe they do get Justin Turner, maybe they do get, I mean, who knows? Pete Alonso and Alex Bregman. We might talk about them in a minute. Um, we don't necessarily know exactly where he's going to fit in, and context is still needed. Um, but what do you think is going to happen with Solano? Because you kind of said all around the place. So you think he's just going to be kind of another utility type?
Um, I think it's I think them getting Solano in the door and on the roster is it just gives them some more options because I don't think they necessarily know what they're gonna do next. Like if they knew what they were gonna do next, like they I think they probably have some things lined up that they know that they could do. Um, I also think they have some things that they're hoping that they can do, but the market has to go a certain way. And so Solano affords them the ability to. I actually don't think he's going to be like I don't think he's going to be the true like platoon at first base. Like I don't see that necessarily. But I think he can fit in a multitude of ways. I think he can play first base against lefties. I think he can play a little bit at second and third base, depending on who you get. But like, I think he can DH. Like he really doesn't have like he's better against lefties, but he doesn't have severe splits or anything like that. It's not like his splits, for example, are not as extreme as Luke Rayleigh's. Not even close. Like he's been good against righties. He's been good against lefties. Now the caveat in all this is you don't. I think he's like a pseudo everyday player, you're not gonna. He's 450 plate appearances somewhere in that realm, probably at the most. He's 37 years old, so like you don't want to overexpose him and put him in the lineup too often. But at the same time, I think he does give them some um, flexibility in terms of what they do next. It's not the same as if they were to acquire Carlos Santana or somebody like that that's only going to be able to play first base. Like he can play. He's played much more third base over the past 2 years than he's played second base. But I think he can still move enough to play either one of those positions or at least stand there and not completely kill you. So I think it does afford them some flexibility, and I think that was reflected in the statements that they provided on the signing. They like his versatility, and I think really they might not know what his exact role is, other than I do think he will play a pretty good amount of first base against lefties, unless the opportunity afforded to them is to go out and get a first baseman. Then he might see more DH and second and third base time. So I think it does afford them some flexibility in terms of what they do next and kind of just whatever the market dictates to them.
Yeah, I like the signing. For mainly the reasons that you said. I mean, it's just the guy hits well and has for the last like 5 seasons. He's only had one season where he was an under league average WRC plus, and he doesn't have to be a platoon like you said. I mean, he still, I think it was at like 103 WRC plus against righties, and then it was like
That's
130 something against lefties. So it's still fine. I don't have a problem with him being a right hand or going against righties. It's just a matter of how many uh, I guess plate appearances do you give him? How many games do you give him? Where do you plug him in defensively? Because I heard people talking like he just isn't a good defender, and it's like he's not a Gold Glover, but he's also not like bad. Like his outs above average is like sometimes negative, sometimes it's like right at zero.
yeah.
It's kind of just he's fine. He's like the
He's
epitome of a
37
fine
years old.
player.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's 37 years old. Like he's never gonna give you. He's not gonna be a 3-win player or anything like that. Like he's he's not like Luis Arias levels of like defensive incompetence. He's fine. Like he's 37 years old, so you don't want him playing defense all the time, especially at second or third base. But like if he's playing first base mostly, like that's where I would feel the most comfortable is if he's kind of in a first base DH situation where he sometimes plays second or third if there's a matchup that
Hmm.
dictates that. But like it's not some catastrophic defensive output that you're getting from him.
Yeah, exactly. So it's been the new talking points at this point are the people that everyone's talking about, not talking about Roki Sasaki. I know people may want to talk about that. I'm sorry, he's not going to be a Mariner. We already kind of know that at this point. It's been more or less confirmed by Passan that that's not going to happen. However, there is still Pete Alonso and Alex Bregman on the market now. With the budget it's at, probably not going to happen, or they would at least need to make some sort of move after that to shed payroll from someone. Um, but regardless, it's came out today that the Mets are not expecting to re-sign him because he wanted 3 years with opt-outs. They didn't want to give him those opt-outs. And I think he was still looking at like 23, 25-ish AAV. And then Alex Bregman, on the other hand, is almost kind of the opposite. He wants a long-term deal. So do you think we're even a possibility on either guy? And if so, like, kind of just what's your reasoning for that?
Um, so I guess where I'm at with this is Bregman is not a possibility. And there's multiple reasons for that. Number one, A1 being the money. Um, and that's just like, generally, I like, yes, in a vacuum, it would be nice to just say, like, hey, the Mariners have a need and it's third base and Alex Bregman is out there. I understand that. At the same time, I don't think he fits very well in T-Mobile Park. Also, he has to want to come play in Seattle, and I don't necessarily think that he probably wants to do that. And if you already have to give him 6, 7 years, how much more are you going to have to pay to get him to agree to do that? I like Alex Bregman is not an opportunity. So the way for the Mariners, at least, the way that I think about Alex Bregman is he to me is kind of the key that unlocks many doors in terms of what they're going to do next, in my opinion. Whether it be him signing and just kind of opening the floodgates of all the other infielders deciding where they want to go. Because I think there's probably a lot of teams that have infield needs that will pivot based on what he decides to do, or they might have players that would then become expendable. So, like what I said last night, one of my tweets last night was like, I think Alex Bregman is kind of the key move here because wherever he signs, whether it's Detroit or the Cubs or the Red Sox, or even for like the Yohan Moncada market potentially opening up, like he is the key that kind of he's the straw that stirs the drink a little bit in terms of what happens the rest of the offseason. Pete Alonso is a little bit of a different story because I do think he's getting to the point where he's falling into the Matt Chapman territory of last offseason. Not quite to that extreme, but to be 100% honest, I'm not a Pete Alonso fan. Um, Now that is mostly been because what he wanted, what I thought he was going to want at the beginning of the offseason, and what he undoubtedly would still love to have is a 5, 6, 7, 8 year deal. And for that type of player, I am just where Seattle's at. I'm just out on that. Um, but the way that the offseason has unfolded, it has basically made him to the point where he is going to be willing to take 1, 2, 3 year deals that might be a little bit higher AAV, um, 20, somewhere between probably 22, 23, and 27 million, probably somewhere in that range. Um, and so I think we're getting to the point where, and maybe they've already done it. That's what we don't know, and that's what's so hard about all of this is that yeah, like we can say in a vacuum, they should go out and they should try to see what Pete Alonso would want. But the player still has to choose you. And if he, at this point, is wanting to take a shorter term deal, that would theoretically mean that he's betting on himself and he wants to go out and test the market again. And, does his agent Scott Boras want him to take that chance in Seattle? Does he want to take that chance in Seattle? I'm not sure, but I do think that where the Mariners are at in this offseason, I think it's a tremendous missed opportunity if they don't at least check in and see, like, hey, what kind of terms is he looking for? Washington doesn't have income tax. Can we make something happen here with Pete Alonso? And if the answer is no, or it's going to be pushing like, hey, we'll do 3 and 30 million a year, then they're probably not going to be in on that. But like if it's 22, 23 million dollars a year and your budget remaining is 13 or something like that, I think that's a worthy guy for this ownership group to be like, hey, we have the Mitches coming off the books next year. Let's bring this guy in, see what he can do for a year. Maybe he opts out at the end of the year, and maybe we don't even have to worry about paying him over the course of a 2 or 3 year deal. Um, but I think it's a very, 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 very low chance that he signs in Seattle. But I think it's more so something that we're probably never even gonna know. But like, do they go and do they kick the tires? Do they at least make the effort to see like, hey, this guy has basically no options on the open market. He has a couple, but would he be interested in playing in Seattle? Would something work? So I think it's a very complex discussion because, if he signs with Toronto or whatever, or with back with the Mets or whatever the case may be, there's undoubtedly going to be people that are like, the Mariners should have done that. And yes, yes, kind of, they should, but like at the same time, the player has to want to do it. And if the ownership group isn't willing to budge on it, then it's kind of just a moot point.
So, are there any guys out there right now that you feel like, outside of them, that you're hoping once those dominoes fall, that the Mariners target? Anyone on your radar right now?
Yeah, I think like I said, I think it's the Alex Bregman market. So I think um I think there's still many different things. I think the I would be very surprised if the Phillies aren't still trying to trade Alec Bohm. Um Now what that looks like, I don't know, but I think they'd be pretty silly to, based on what they've been trying to ask for him all offseason, what's been reported, I think they'd be pretty silly to trade him before Alex Bregman goes. And also, I guess another guy to throw into this conversation is Nolan Arenado. I think that based on where Alex Bregman and Nolan Arenado go, there are players that could be moved based on where those players go. So, for example, like let's say that Alex Bregman goes to the Mets or whatever.
Mhm.
Okay. Now the Phillies have potentially a couple more teams that are interested in pursuing Alec Bohm because Alex Bregman is no longer an option. Um, so I think Alec Bohm is somebody that I would keep an eye on because I do think they would like to move him. Based on, they basically came out and said like there was reports that he just no longer fits there in the clubhouse and all that kind of stuff. So that's one guy to keep an eye on. If the Cubs were to sign Alex Bregman, okay, that opens up the door to maybe the Nico Horner conversation again, who we know the Mariners have liked. I've heard that they've liked him for a long time. Um, if he was to sign with the Tigers and his old manager, AJ Hinch, okay, they have several younger infield types that would be more in the mold of like a JP Crawford or a Ty France acquisition that haven't necessarily produced at the big league level a ton yet, but are right on the doorstep and would theoretically be blocked. They also have Matt Vierling, who played a lot of third base and all over the diamond for them last year. So that's another guy that fits if you were to sign in Detroit. Um, the Red Sox, like maybe, you know, they have a multitude of different guys, but like maybe Vaughn Grissom becomes available there, or maybe Tristan Casas. Like I don't think that that's going to happen, but you never know. That name's been floated, and they're clearly somewhat motivated to talk and potentially move Tristan Casas. So I think it does open, and also Yohan Moncada. Like it's been reported that he's waiting to see what Alex Bregman gets, and I'm sure guys like Jose Iglesias are in the same type of a boat here. So I think it just that market needs to move, is
Yeah.
what I think. And, when that market does move, and I think there's a small part of it that Roki Sasaki impacts as well. Um, and I think with the Cardinals, like I mentioned a little bit, um, Arenado seems like kind of the domino that they would like to tip over that domino to start doing other things. And so you never know. Like maybe they are willing to move Brendan Donovan, but they want to see kind of what they get in a return for Nolan Arenado first. You just don't really know what kind of domino effects could happen with some of these players, and there are some interesting infield options out there amongst the teams that are interested in this Alex Bregman, Nolan Arenado kind of realm. So I do think that those players could be of interest to Seattle. And I mean, if you really think about it, there's no reason that they should have. I mean, we don't know what's happening behind the scenes, but there's no real reason why they should have made a move yet. If some of their offers might be better, or some players might come available that wouldn't be otherwise available unless those teams sign those players.
Do you think, and still talking about dominoes, do you think when Sasaki signs, that would be a prudent time for the Mariners to start potentially dangling Castillo for especially those teams that miss out on Sasaki or have already or get to that finish line and then miss out, when he eventually signs with the Dodgers, let's be real. This is how the offseason works is you have those certain guys that are the barometers for everyone else. And once they go, everyone's like, okay, I can start basing what I want off of that and go from there. And with Roki Sasaki, I think it makes a lot of sense to capitalize on the disappointment of a team missing out on him to hopefully just get just that bit more back for Castillo that you probably wouldn't have initially. And especially like the Toronto Blue Jays, right? Because at this point, I feel like they have to be so desperate to make something happen for that fan base. They're missing out on everyone. It's become like the
Yeah.
meme of the offseason now, of the past two, because we had the whole Otani thing last year at the plane, and that was embarrassing for them. And now, you're at a point where they're like, do we have to deal Guerrero or Bichette or whatever? And all this offseason they've been missing out on people. And they might sign Alonso, they might not. What if they miss out on him? Then they may even be even more desperate to give you something. Now, what do the Blue Jays give you? I don't necessarily know. They're not going to give you Vlad for Castillo. Um, but regardless, I just feel like that strategy makes the most sense if you are feeling like that's the only way you're going to get that bat back. Because I feel like that's what we've all kind of resigned ourselves to, even though we hate the idea of having to trade from this rotation. Like realistically, with $14 million, how do you do that? And just doesn't feel like a lot of teams are looking for prospects right now, even though we have so many. So,
Yeah.
do we feel like that's probably what they could do?
Yeah, I don't even necessarily think that it's, and this has kind of been the misnomer. I don't necessarily, it's just supply and demand, right? So like, it's not necessarily that the Padres or the Dodgers or the Blue Jays, those three finalists are going to be, oh, we didn't get Saki. Okay, it's Luis Castillo time. I don't necessarily think it's that. It's more so like, okay, now that that guy's off the market, now we can truly see what teams would be willing to do for Luis Castillo. I don't think that they've ever really truly wanted to move him. I think there's been some reporting out there, probably drummed up by other teams to a certain extent, to get them to be more willing to move him. I don't think that they necessarily want to, and I think that they're going to stick to that gun until they get something that's worth it. And maybe that doesn't happen, and would be totally fine with that. I would be totally fine with them holding on to him because I just don't know if I see that right situation. Every time I think of a Luis Castillo deal, it's sort of I hit a roadblock with it. Well, like, why would this team do that? I would be pretty surprised if the Twins weren't willing to talk about Pablo Lopez, another guy out there. So I don't necessarily think it's like one of those teams missing out on a guy like Sasaki and then being like, okay, our pivot is Luis Castillo. I think it's more just supply and demand in the market. And I think that there's a pretty good chance that the Mariners know there is a lever or two that they could probably pull prospect wise to make a deal with somebody. It might not be the most amazing deal in the world. It might be for somebody that's a little less heralded, but I bet that there's a deal out there that they know they could probably make with prospects. But you're waiting. You're waiting at this point, and you've gotten this far into the offseason waiting. There's still plenty of people out there, um, and so I think it's more so that situation, which is hard to understand because it might not be the case, but it also might be the case that it just opens up a new level to those discussions, and I think that's probably where they're kind of waiting in the wings.
Yeah, so we're just to end this out, going back to Mariners fans and kind of how the landscape of Mariners fans this off season and how we talk about what's been going on. So I guess um just kind of like touching on, I don't know, the best way for Mariners fans to not only digest the information that we're getting, because we get reports from everywhere about the Mariners are either in or not in on this. Shout out John Morosi. We're tied to every single free agent ever in the history of the game. But it's just like, what are I guess, the best ways for Mariners fans to analyze how this off season's been going? When you see news, what it means when we do sign a player, how to properly put that in the context of the team and digest it in a, I guess, more healthy way. Because it's like we were talking about with Donovan Solano. It's just like, oh yeah, we're gonna win the world. Like all those the comments like, oh yeah, here we go, World Series 2025, baby, and all that stuff. So yeah, I guess just touching on that for the last part of how can we be better as far as being more informed and talking about this in a more healthy way.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way to create that necessarily. Like they've unfortunately, and I will not tell people how to fan. Like they've unfortunately subjected themselves to people being mad at them because of the way that they've behaved. And that is just unfortunately the bucket of whatever that they've created for themselves. Like they've done this to themselves with the way that they've behaved and some of the things that they've said. They've made themselves a pretty easy target for whatever they do. A large section of the fan base is not going to like it. Okay. But the number one thing that I do keep going back to is like I I don't think at the end of the day that whatever they do this offseason is going to make or break what I know it feels like it in the moment that whatever they do or don't do this offseason is going to make or break their result at the end of next season. And that might be true to a certain extent if you are a couple games out and you could have made that big move, that big splash.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, I think a lot of this comes down to how well do the players on your roster perform. If I would say they'll probably be in a pretty damn good spot if they stay relatively healthy on the mound and their guys up the middle. When I'm saying that, Julio, Cal, and JP, if those guys play well and they get supplementary performances by the Rosarenas and the Victor Robleses and the Luke Raley's of the world, like if those guys play like they've played in the past and like some of the things on the back of their baseball card would suggest, they're they're going to be fine. So I think a lot of the times we neglect who's actually on the roster. I know that they have holes, and I'm not trying to tell you that they don't. But I personally think it's way more important that the players that are on the roster meet the expectations that they probably should. And if they do that and they hit on a couple of these offseason things, like they should be just fine. And so I think that's the biggest thing is like we do neglect pretty often. And I know that's part of the reason why it's frustrating as well. Like I've said this a million times. They have conquered some of the most difficult things to do for a front office when building a baseball team is you have to be good up the middle. And they are very good up the middle. Like they've acquired the catcher, they've acquired the center fielder, they have the shortstop, they have all the pitching. And so that's why it's frustrating, right? That they don't make these supplementary moves. But at the same time, like those are the players that drive the bus. Those are the players that are going, if they're really good, those are the players that are going to push this team over the top. Um, and so I think it's sometimes easy for us to forget who they do have while we're focusing on who they don't have. And so that's the way that I try to approach it, especially like when when I when we go down the negativity rabbit hole of like, man, the Mariners and their ownership and their front office, but sometimes I just try to focus on like what do they have? They do have a lot of really, really fun, talented players that I very much enjoy watching play baseball. And so that's what I always try to fall back on. But like no matter what, there's gonna be people that don't like it. There's gonna be people that are upset. And so that's kind of just the way that it is. And you hope that the front office can find a way to maneuver um, the rest of this offseason and make the most of whatever opportunities are given to them.
Yep. I agree, and I think it's when we're talking about Solano, it's like, yeah, he's not this big flashy move that we're all waiting and hoping that they make, but we can't let that affect how we talk about who Solano is, and just be like, oh yeah, just in what L move or whatever I've seen so many
It's not
times.
Donovan Solano's fault. Like,
Yeah,
also not Donovan Solano's fault that like some of the other second basemen that they've acquired have not been good. Like,
yeah.
that's not his fault. Like, I understand the frustration with that, but like,
Hmm.
it's also not his. Like, that's not his problem.
Exactly. Yeah, and once again, it's just a matter of still looking at who they got and understanding that hopefully Julio can be Julio this year. He definitely had a bit of a step back last year. Maybe this is the year that he really goes off and makes that MVP case. Victor Robles is kind of that wild card. Like he could end up turning back into a pumpkin. We don't know. Or he could, I mean, he's certainly not going to sustain the level of production he was giving us. But he could still be very valuable, especially on the bases. I mean, we could see even if he wasn't getting the hits necessarily, once he got on base, I mean, he can steal second and steal third on just about anyone. So like that is a very valuable thing to have. And then not only our pitching, obviously, we all know we have the good pitching. We have some of the best rotation in the game, and our bullpen, especially once Brash is back, and hopefully Santos ends up being kind of who we think he can be. We really were supposed to have that kind of like three-headed dragon at the end of the bullpen last year, and that just kind of all blew up. Maybe this
Yeah.
is the year where we do have that. I mean, it's just there are things that went wrong last season that could go right this season, and I will always implore, like, we were only one game off, and baseball is a weird sport and weird things happen, that regardless of who we end up picking up for the rest of the off season, I mean, we still could run the table. I mean, it's just a thing where any team technically can. I mean, there's a few exceptions, but it's just like, why can't they have a great year and make one of those Cinderella runs and get into the playoffs and make a deep run? They could, especially with how they're built now. And, hopefully they can make some more moves to help out with that. But yeah, so that's going to be it from us today. Ben, any parting words for the Mariners fans listening at this point?
Yeah, I think um I mean, as hard as it is to do, just like see what the whole picture looks like at the end. If you want to be pissed, be pissed. Whatever. But like, I don't really think that each move has to be met with such vitriol necessarily. I think it's I just think it's more interesting to see like what is the plan? Like what are they gonna try to do next? And that's kind of the way that I approach it. But I understand. I understand the frustration. Totally understand it. Especially with feeling like you're missing opportunities and feeling like you're potentially missing a window. Totally, totally get it. But there's still plenty of reasons why this is wide open for them in the AL West this season, and um, still about a month left in the off season, um, and there's still plenty of time for them to make some things happen. So not a failure of an off season yet. If obviously if you went into opening day like this, you'd be a little bit
I
worried,
would say
but
so.
it's not the off season's not over yet. And so I think there's still a path to creating an off season that gives you a really good chance to be very, very competitive in this division. And you still have some guys on this roster, like Julio Rodriguez, like kind of how you just mentioned. Like if he's an MVP, I think he fixes a MVP type candidate. I think he fixes a lot of things on this roster. So um, there are some reasons to be hopeful and excited, even when it doesn't necessarily feel like that.
Yep. I definitely agree. But yeah, that's going to be it from us in this one. I appreciate anyone who listened to this. Obviously, go check out Ben on the Sea Level Substack. He puts out some great stuff for Mariners fans. But yeah, that's going to be it from us. It's nice to talk ball again. And, hopefully my next video isn't a game show. So there's that. But we'll see. So yeah, I appreciate you watching. That's going to be it for me in this one. I will see you in the next.